If you love someone, do you think it's okay to have sex?
Yeah.
And that prior to marriage?
Yeah. Based on your own beliefs, whatever makes you comfortable. Yeah.
And most times when I think I have a crush on someone, it's mostly from just kind of like a more of a sexual attraction.
Because if you love someone, you should show it. And if you really, really love someone, then it means something. If you're just going to have sex, then it's a different story. But if you love someone, I think it's fine to have sex with them. I don't think you should wait till you're married. I think you should see what you like. Sex is really important in a relationship. I mean, no matter what people say, it's important.
It's all about the sex, too, and it's all reflected in the sex. Good sex, good love.
People can do whatever they want. It's a free world, free to live it how you want to live it. And so if two people decide mutually that they want to have sex, then I see no problem with it.
And it's a hard conflict. Once you cross that line, it's hard to go back. And a lot of times, nobody really can.
Every Friday and Saturday night, and a lot of nights in between, men and women, they primp and they prep and they get ready to go out. And the goal is to find that special person. For some, it's a dream to find that one special relationship. And for others, it's a goal to have sex that night. And sometimes those two people intersect, and one doesn't know what the other's looking for. Let me ask you, do you know the difference between love and sex? If you don't think knowing the difference between love and sex makes a difference, then watch as I share 3 crucial stories of 3 people that didn't know the difference, and they paid a huge price for it. Open your workbooks now, and let's dig in together.
I'd like you to listen as I share these stories, not so much just with your ears or even your mind. I want you to listen with your heart. Ask God to speak to you as you listen and hear and ponder. I'm going to tell you the story of Lauren, the story of Mike, and then the story of Paula. Lauren and her boyfriend walked into his apartment after a few hours of studying at the college library. Before Mike opened the door, he grinned teasingly and looked at Lauren and said, "My roommate's gone for the night." Lauren tensed a bit as he nudged her into the living room, and before she could even get her jacket off, he began to kiss her and go crazy and say, "Oh, you're so gorgeous," he whispered to her. "I care so much about you. I want you to know it." Lauren's mind was whirling, and she searched his eyes, and she nodded without thinking as he led her to his bedroom. She later shared with these counselors, Les and Leslie Parrott, "Mike believed in me when no one else would. I wasn't planning to have sex with him that night, but I knew the future of our relationship probably would be over if we weren't intimate soon." During the next few months, Laura became literally consumed, obsessed with Mike. He was all that mattered. Sex soon became a part of every date. When Lauren began to talk about changing her summer plans to be with Mike, something strange happened. His passion began to cool. As she recounted to the counselor, she said, "I changed the whole course of my life by saying yes to his sexual advance. And now he's retreating from me because I was changing my summer plans. And it was all just to be with him." Lauren's story, however, is not uncommon. National studies show that only 17% of young women ever plan to have sexual intercourse the first time it happens. Meaning, most of them apparently get caught up in the heat of the moment, and it just happens. Lauren's story is very simple. I loved him. I thought if we didn't have sex soon, I would lose his love. He cared about me. I cared about him. And the only way to keep our relationship together was to give in and have sex. Unfortunately for Lauren, the exact opposite happened. And her story is the norm, not the exception. But lest we paint Mike in a negative light, let's consider Lauren's story from Mike's perspective as he shares it with the counselors. He sees what happened that night in that apartment very, very differently than Lauren. After dating for more than 4 months, he and Lauren had grown very close. And they talked very openly about intimate issues. Mike, for example, knew all about Lauren's turbulent, sometimes borderline abusive relationship with her father. And Lauren knew about Mike and the disastrous breakup that he went through with his ex-girlfriend. As Mike put it, Lauren and I knew each other's hearts. We cared deeply for each other. They also enjoyed what he described as the world's greatest marathon makeout sessions. We could lose absolute track of time. And he admitted that even though they never came close to going all the way, he thought about it. But he said, I figured that the more we love each other, the more intimate we would be. And on one occasion, I even brought up kind of us taking a bath together. And she just kind of grinned and teased and giggled. All that nebulous and flirtatious talk to Mike meant we're falling in love. And sex would be the natural expression of his love. In my line of thinking, Mike said as he talked to the counselors, was sex is a way of expressing feelings you can't express with words. Believe me, I'm not the kind of guy who's looking for a one-night stand. I'm not going to jump in the sack with just anybody. He said, I believe in honoring women. And, I would never use a woman just to get sex. It's weird, Mike told the counselors. Once Lauren changed her summer plans just to be with me, I began to feel smothered. She was making like this big commitment, and I just wasn't ready for that. Mike wasn't ready for the commitment that sex communicated to Lauren. To him, it was an event. It was an expression of love. But the act of sex to Lauren was, you are committed to me. And when she began to respond to that commitment, he ran. Mike believed that sex is the natural expression of love. If you really love each other, sex is sanctified by love. And now the girl of his dreams is smothering him. And what was a great relationship is now gone. Because sex did just the opposite of what it promised. Paula's story is a little different. She also is a counselor. And we'll listen in as she interviews 2 young women. The first is 20 and is in a tragic situation. The second is 30. Let's listen in. Paula says, the woman that I'm listening to is sitting slouched on my sofa. She's a lovely woman, but her eyes are tired and depressed. I can hardly believe she's only 20. She hates being in the counselor's office, but she's got to talk to someone. It's her life that's the problem, she says. It's not going well. She wishes her boyfriend were more attentive, and she wished her father had not married that difficult woman who's become her stepmother. She wonders about her relationship with God, and yes, she sleeps with her boyfriend in case you want to know. And she said it in such a way that, why did I ask such a dumb question? With all those facts on the table, she suddenly turned the pages of her past back 5 years. And she began to open up to Paula the counselor and talk about her very first sexual encounter. She said, I didn't want to have a bad experience in losing my virginity, like some of my friends. So I found a guy I didn't feel anything special for, and I had sex with him so I could get it over with. Your virginity was something you wanted to just get over with? Paula asked. Well, sure. That way I could enjoy sex with more guys that I really cared about. Her words explain logic that's alien, the counselor says, to my own generation, but one that is all too common in hers, where sex is the rite of passage for a girl into relationships, into where all the happy people are, or so we're led to believe. But it looks different about 10 years later, and another counseling appointment comes in. This woman is in her 30s. She's married. She has 2 children, a job. One small problem. She hates sex. She's attractive. Her husband's attractive. And she said, what can I do to help you? How can you help me overcome this reluctance? It's boring. It's distasteful. And my husband's tired of my reluctance. We argue about it all the time. She pleads and says, please, help me with this. What am I going to do? As the counseling session unfolds, she began to probe into Molly's sexual past. She discovered that Molly had sex the first time at about 16 and had sex with about 10 different men, including her husband. But she doesn't see any relationship with that and now. In fact, that's in the past. She goes to church. She's reformed. She loves God. I mean, how could what I did years ago have any bearing on now? Those 10 partners, however, have bearing on her present sexual experience. And then Paula, the counselor, asked her a very, very penetrating question because they weren't making much progress. She said, Molly, can you picture what it would be like, what it would really feel like to be cherished by a man? To be so special to him that he would want to protect your innocence? Can you sense what it means to be so valued by a man that what mattered to you the most would matter to him? She makes no response for a while, and finally a little trail of tears slide down her cheek, and the best clue to the sense of her loss as she connects her early promiscuity with the boredom she now experiences. I've heard those stories with different names so many times that I cannot tell you. And what I know for a fact is those stories represent many of the people that are sitting in this room. You've been there, many of you. You've done that. You've felt that. I summarized on my notes a couple things that might be of interest to you. Lauren's story is really pretty simple. Her message is, and maybe you've thought this one, if I love him and we don't have sex, I'll lose him. Premise, if I give in and have sex, it'll keep the relationship alive. The truth is, and statistics show, once sex enters into a relationship, it almost always disintegrates instead of gets better. She was wrong, and she lost Mike. Mike's story was that if we really love each other, then sex is sanctified. It's okay. We really love each other. But what he didn't understand was that he had strong feelings, and he had feelings of love, but he didn't really love her as in commitment. I'm for you. I'll be there, bar none. I'm in it with you for life. But that's what sex is communicating to a woman. And so he expressed the natural expression of sex, and he lost the woman of his dreams. For one teenager, she's been so inundated by Cosmo and MTV and VH1 and People magazine and all of her peers, she just wants to get it over with and have her rite of passage. And she has no idea that she's peeling a part of her heart and giving it away carelessly. And the very gift and awe and wonder of true intimacy that a God who loves her and creates her and wants her to have, with every sexual encounter, she diminishes the possibility and the capacity to ever experience that in reality. And for Molly, she learned it the hard way. She's now 30 years old and 14 years with 10 different men and cannot figure out why I love my husband, but this is so distasteful. Because she has baggage. Because sex apart from total commitment produces manipulation. And people get used and people use and people blame. And people do all kind of stuff with sex. It's not a casual thing. It's a holy thing. It was meant to bond two people at the soul and the heart and the emotions and the mind. And it is a wonderful, supernatural, God-given gift by the Creator. He made it up. And when something so holy is used lightly, it produces pain and chaos. What all four of these people have in common is this. They didn't understand the relationship between love and sex. They didn't understand the difference between love and sex. And notice on the very bottom of your handout, I've put the summary statement. When we fail to understand the difference between love and sex, we are doomed to failure in both our relationships and our sexuality. Let me read that again. I want it to sink in. When you, the person sitting in your chair, fails to understand the difference between love and sex, you're doomed in your relationships and also in your sexuality. And it's rampant. It's everywhere. We see it everywhere. We are being deceived. We're being hoodwinked. You've bought a bill of goods through the tube, through the magazines, through the books, telling us that it's just finding the right person, falling in love, looking sharp, pumping iron, have the encounter, meet the person. Real life doesn't play out that way. And God wants you to know today that He wants you to know the difference between the two. He wants you to know that sex isn't dirty, it's not bad, and He doesn't want you to wake up at 30 or 40 or 50 and be bored and burned out and disconnected. Because what you long for, what I long for, what we want is intimacy. And sex is God's gift to express intimacy at a level that words can't comprehend. But every time we give it away where there's not true commitment and intimacy, our capacity to have it is reduced.
In this session, we learned that there's a huge difference between love and sex. But if you don't understand that difference, you're destined to ruin your relationships and also not have the sexuality that God intended. As you listened to the stories, what went through your mind? As you heard the testimonies at the beginning of this teaching, and you heard the real life stories of real live people, and you saw the sadness and you saw the pain, what went through your mind? You may have noticed that there were 3 fundamental lies that we covered about the difference between sex and love. Lauren believed lie number 1, that to keep the relationship alive, you need to have sex. She thought if she didn't have sex with Mike soon, she would lose him. And the fact of the matter, after she had sex, she lost him. Lie number 2 was the lie that if we really love one another, sex is okay. And we find that just the opposite is true. And lie number 3 was this kind of bizarre sense that sex is a rite of passage. You're not a real man or a real woman until you have sex. Can I ask you a very personal question that you don't need to share with the group, but you need to ask yourself, which of those 3 lies do you tend to believe? Which one of those have been pounded into your head and that really shapes how you think about love or sex or both? In this session, you may have noticed we didn't do a lot of teaching right out of the Bible. And we did that purposefully. I wanted you to see kind of what the problems were with believing the lies before we talked about the answer. In our next session, we're going to jump right into Ephesians chapter 5, verses 3 through about 6 or 7. And you'll learn exactly what God has to say about sex and love. But not growing up as a believer, you know what I know? When you read those verses, they just feel like a straitjacket. They feel like this God must be a cosmic prude. And why does He say, do not have a hint of immorality and no coarse jesting? And He says all these very specific things that, I don't know about you, they seem kind of old-fashioned and puritanical in our day. Now let me ask you, when you heard the stories of the people and their pain and their hurt when they didn't do life and love and sex God's way, what happened? You know, I'd like to close our time before you have your discussion and share with the rest of the group which one of those stories you most identified with and why. And by the way, small group leader, would you again start on this one? This can be sensitive and you need to share appropriately, briefly, but model a healthy sense of vulnerability. And as we wrap it up, I want you to know that what I've shared are not the thoughts of Chip Ingram. What we shared is what God says in His Word. And the reason He says it is not that He's a prude, not that sex is bad. He says this because you matter so much to Him that He wants you to have the greatest relationships in the world, and yes, the best sex in the world. And with that as His heart concern, He says to you, and He says to me in Ephesians 5:3, but among you there must not even be a hint, think of that, a hint of immorality or impurity or greed, because these things are improper for God's people. In our next session, I'm going to tell you why and explain why God doesn't even want a hint of immorality. because He has such great plans for you and your relationships. Let's open those workbooks now and dig in together.